Hey guys, it is Chad here from the Battle Warrior Podcast, and I'm just letting all you listeners know that the Battle Warrior Podcast episodes will be available across all podcast platforms, guys. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this brand new episode today. All right, guys, welcome to Battle Warrior Podcast. And this guest, I wanted to showcase no matter what, because sometimes in this life, the stories make who you are right now. But the cool thing about it is reminiscing back and exactly just creating everything here. This guest here, guys, has a phenomenal, I don't want to use the term resume. I just love his history of what you accomplished and what you want. So welcome to the show here. Is it Vic Ferrari?
Yeah.
Vic Ferrari.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me on the show, and thank you for your kind words.
Absolutely, man. And the cool thing here, guys are listening. Obviously, you pick up the New York in you. And the thing that we're sitting there asking is, what makes him so special? And I'm sitting here looking at it going, I'm just going to come down to two things. You're best-selling author and you're retired NYPD. And with that, the stories can probably go endless.
Yeah, I haven't run out yet. It's funny you should say that. Like, I've written a series of books about my former NYPD career. And the funny thing is, like, I was apprehensive of writing these books because I didn't want to get anybody divorced or fired or out anybody. And I was afraid that I was going to get blowback from my peers. And the funny thing is, as soon as I started writing these books, my phone started blowing up, but it was from guys and girls like, you should have wrote about this fucking guy, or, remember when this happened? So it's like, now they're feeding me shit. I mean, in addition, I've got my own stories, but they feed me stuff all the time. Or sometimes I'm just on the phone with one of my cop friends, or even my brother, who's a retired NYPD cop. We're talking, and I'm like, oh, I forgot all about that. He's like, motherfucker. He goes, you got to write everything down. I said, it keeps the stories in my head.
Well, and also, dude, you don't want to dump it all in one book.
No, anything that's too long, even if you enjoy it, is too long. So my books are anywhere between 220 and 230 pages of short stories of funny things that happened in my NYPD career.
I was going to say, and anybody, both of us are authors. I'm thinking, what is that, 32,000 words ish? 35, somewhere in there?
It's more than that. I hit 60,000 words, and then I start doing the editing process.
Mm-hmm.
They're paperbacks. So I usually, by the time it gets a copy edit and proofread, anywhere between 50 and 55,000 words.
Okay. Yeah, I think mine was 31,000. We condensed it down to like 15, 16, somewhere in there. Obviously, we, just like everything, you cut off some things and not say save the material. You just kind of chunk out what you don't want to use and kind of shelf it until the next time you want to use it. It's the best way of saying it.
No, that's a perfect way of saying it, because sometimes you have a story and it's good and you can tell that story great, but you're struggling to get it to sound funny in written form. So sometimes I'll throw that on the shelf, but I'll come back to that.
Yeah, and coming from, like I said, both of us, let's go back to the first book. The process of creating that book and laying it out. Because I know people are like, hey, this is such a huge thing. That's a huge accomplishment. I'm writing for my second one, and I'm more, the issues I have now is more writer's block. Like, I don't want to write. The other stuff, that came easy. For me,
putting a book together, you mean?
Yeah. For me, on the first time, that was the easiest. I worked with some people, but in general, it was like, once the first rough came, it was just edit, boom, 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 yep, gone. It was so fast, like the last 2 months.
Well, I think I can help you with the writer's block thing. So what I've learned is, when I start writing a book, and my books usually, with the exception of one of my books, none of my books have a beginning, middle, end. It's just a chapter with stories. So basically, there'll be a chapter in my book, Crossing Over to the Dark Side, which is about police corruption. Boom, there's 4 or 5 stories in that chapter. Or I've got it in another one of my books, I write about overweight cops and cops that try to get out on tax-free disability where there's nothing wrong with them. That chapter is called Sickness, Health, and Fat Bastards. Boom. There's 5 or 6 stories in there. So, I mean, to new authors, I would say don't write in chronological order, because you're going to sit there, and that's the biggest hurdle. Like, okay, the beginning, you're going to frustrate yourself, you're going to intimidate yourself, and you're going to go, I can't do this, I'll never get it done. You know what your book's going to be about, sort of, and you know the stories that are going to be in there. Think of a story that you really want to tell, and it just flows. You've told the story to friends a million times, and start with that one and grow it. And then when you hit writer's block with that, take a step back and start writing about another story. And then what you do is at the end, you tie everything together like a Seinfeld episode.
Absolutely. And I'm sure my life's hopefully when I'm at the stage that you're at, this stage, all the fulfillment and stories and stuff will keep racking up. So let's dig in a couple of your good stories. So what was the most, and we were laughing already coming on stage, talk about stand-up comedy. Can't get in too much details. I get it, just for the sake of what you said, just there's some rules behind it, but who were your favorite stories when you were working full-time?
Oh, the NYPD, so you got 35,000 members, right? Spread over 5 boroughs. I mean, that's a lot of cops, right? And I've known guys that have gotten into trouble, and you hear things. I mean, there's famous stories in the NYPD that, like, they'll say, oh, that's bullshit. And it's like, no, it's not. Like, I was just on another podcast. I was telling a story. It's called "The Chinese Guy Walks Into a Police Station." Well, there was a Chinese chief. He was in plain clothes, civilian clothes. He was wearing a white shirt, black slacks, and he was carrying a brown paper bag. He walks into this busy NYPD precinct. He wants to see somebody upstairs. He stops at the desk. In the NYPD, anybody above the rank of captain, if they're recognized, or especially if they're in uniform, whoever sees them first says, "Attention," and everybody stops and jumps out of a chair, right? So this guy is used to the VIP treatment. He's in another precinct. Nobody knows who this guy is. The Chinese guy, he's dressed as he's dressed, holding a brown paper bag. He's standing in front of the desk officer. The desk officer picks up his head, gives him like, "You want to give me a second?" He's writing in the command log. The chief got pissed off. He clears his voice. The desk officer looks up again and says, "Oh," and shouts across the precinct, "Who ordered Chinese food?" Because he thought he was the fucking delivery guy. Well, that didn't go over very well. So in the NYPD, we call it diesel therapy. So if you live in the Bronx, they will transfer you to Staten Island, which is the other end of the city. So they're going to give you a 2-hour commute and costly tolls, right? So that, you know, a couple of people that were in the station house got fucked. So, but the story doesn't end there. About a month or 2 later, there's this captain. He has to get in touch with that chief. He calls up his cell phone. Chief doesn't answer the phone. This captain leaves him a voice message and then thinks he hangs up the call, but he doesn't. And he's sitting in a car with 2 other NYPD members, and they're laughing about the story about everybody getting launched and him being mistaken as the Chinese delivery guy. The chief plays the message, hears them laughing at him, and transfers all of them all over the place. So heads roll twice in one story.
Politics, guys, politics.
Oh, yeah. Oh, shit rolls downhill in the NYPD.
So I'm not even going to ask about 9/11 and all that stuff. I just want to ask in general, of how crazy does New York NYPD get in general, just like New York, when it's at the peak of the peak?
No 2 days are the same in the NYPD. There's days I used to come in and go, oh, it's Friday. I'm going to try not to get involved in anything too heavy. I want to go out that night. And you walk into a homicide and you're there all night long processing a crime scene. Or I worked 17 out of 20 years down at Times Square on New Year's Eve, which is a fucking circus. You know, people think that it's like all orderly down there and shit. It's not. Everybody's trapped in those pens like cattle. No, there's no bathrooms to use. So people, you know, there's no place to go to the bathroom. So they go into the bathroom in the crowd. They're throwing up on each other. I've seen them change tampons. I mean, it's a fucking circus in there. No 2 days are ever the same. And, you know, it can get hectic quick. I mean, it's just, you never knew what to expect. You just didn't. I mean, yeah, sure, there was downtime where you're like, Jesus Christ, the radio's not going off, nothing's going on. But I mean, for the most part, you're doing something.
Well, I was gonna say when the radio's not going off, you're probably almost getting like very high anxiety because you know something's coming.
It depends on the type of cop you are. I was always active. I like to make a lot of arrests. I like to, kick the bee's nest. So, I mean, my partner and I would be driving around looking for an arrest, and then when I was a detective, I worked in organized crime in the auto crime division. So we would pick off the garden variety car thieves from time to time and get into car chases. But then we also worked on organized gangs and crews that were exporting stolen cars out of the country, chop shops, changing VIN numbers on stolen cars for resale, identity theft. So, I mean, the NYPD, you can be whatever you want, really. I mean, if you put in the hard work and you get good evaluations and you stay out of trouble and you just keep, doing the work, you can go anywhere in the NYPD because it's such a big police department. There's so many different units. I grew up in a neighborhood where there was 1,000,001 car thieves. I knew so much about stolen cars. I was like, you know what, this is a good fit for me. And that's where I went.
Absolutely. And I'm just chuckling with this because obviously police force in real life is a lot different. Police force on movies, just for the sake of that. But there's only one thing that comes to my mind right now, and it's not comedy like we said before, but I have a couple friends that were behind the scenes in some of the larger cities, and they just talked about like the families and stuff, and families running certain towns, and cops kind of making sure that all the, I'd say the families are taking care of themselves, but just make sure that everything's settled between families. Did that occur in New York?
Well, let's take a step back. Before I was a cop, I grew up in the Bronx, and my neighborhood, I joke about it. I said the neighborhood was Irish and Italian and the mafia sprinkled in. So my neighborhood was one of those places where people didn't really call the cops all that often. So, if you're fucking around with the wrong guy's sister or you owed somebody money, someone with an Abraham Lincoln mask and a baseball bat was going to pay you a visit. In New York, no. I mean, for general, that was kind of phased out. I know what you're talking about, like smaller town politics where you're not gonna pull over the mayor's brother for a DUI, even though he's a drunk and he's driving on the wrong side of the road. New York didn't really have that. Was there things like that going on? Yeah, sure. At the higher levels where things would get squashed. Did it roll down into with us? Not really. I mean, I saw a couple of times. I remember early in my career, there was an assemblywoman on the midnight. Her daughter had gotten locked up. Her daughter was a crackhead. She got locked up in a stolen car, and there were drugs in the car. And the cops that made the arrest locked everybody up in the car. She made a couple of phone calls, and then somebody from downtown was like demanding this cop void the arrest. And I don't think he did. I think he said, well, if you want to squash this arrest so bad, have it taken care of at the district attorney's office. And the ironic thing is, like, when I was writing one of my book, when I was putting this in one of my earlier books, I was like, whatever happened to that woman? And she had been arrested a couple of years after that for taking kickbacks or something. So, it's like, she kept putting her hand in the cookie jar, and apparently she got caught.
Oh, yeah. Good old fashioned politics right there.
Yeah. I mean, it did not a lot. I mean, New York is just too big of a place. You know what I mean? It's I get what you're saying, but I mean, New York, that would happen upstairs. You know what I mean?
Yep. Whole different level versus what everyday life is. And
yeah.
And I will admit that I want to ask you, not even ask you that, but there is a separation between that, correct?
What do you mean?
Like a separation where it's like the normal everyday life, and then there's also like everyday living, ground level in New York, and then there's also a different upstairs levels, like you were saying.
There's a lot of money in New York. You know what I mean? It's listen, in New York, I grew up lower middle class. I worked in poor neighborhoods most of my NYPD career, but there were a handful of times, like some of my victims were extremely wealthy people. I remember one time we did a case. these guys were ripping off. What they were doing was pretty funny. There was a couple of car washes on the west side of Manhattan, right off the West Side Highway. And what these guys would do is they would get dropped off and they would go into these car washes. And they would, like a car wash, you walk right through, you can grab an air freshener and you could, through the glass, you're watching your car go through. They pretend like they're in there for a reason. And they would spot like a weak attendant that was, as the cars are coming off that conveyor belt, someone's got their back turned when they should be cleaning the windows or something. They would jump into the car and take off. So we were getting hit. They did like 4 or 5. They got greedy. They did like 4 or 5 cars, and the owner of the car wash had gotten a license plate number of one of the cars. So we tracked that car through parking tickets up to the Bronx. So we locked these guys up when we did all these lineups and put them away. But one of the victims, I forget, he was a fashion designer or worked for one of the big. He was either a fashion designer or worked for one of the large scale cosmetic companies. And I remember going to his apartment, like I had never seen anything like this before. Like we went into an elevator and went right up to his apartment. Like I had seen that on television. I had never experienced it. I'm like, holy shit, like what how much does this fucking place cost? You know what I mean? So yeah, there's definitely different levels in New York with money.
Yeah, it's not say absolutely insane, but when you're not at that level all the time, I'm just so
nice
used
to see how the other half lives. Like, you know what I mean? It's like
Benson.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Sometimes. Oh, I remember one time I pulled over a woman, and I was not a ticket guy. Like in the NYPD, there is a quota system. They want you to write tickets. They'll bust your balls if you don't write tickets. So you have to write them, but you don't have to be a dick about it. And I wasn't one. I didn't really like writing tickets, and I'll never forget. I pulled over this woman. She had an accent, and I'm asking her for a driver's license, and she's showing me photos of her and her husband with famous people. And I was like, well, that's really nice. Can I see your license? And I was the type of guy, if I pulled you over and either you apologized or gave me a bullshit story that was kind of funny, I'm not going to get, if all your shit's in order, we got enough people that hate us. Just, stay out of trouble. Here's your license, give them a warning. And she like, I was getting to the point where I was going to lock her up for failure to show me her ID. And she's like, yeah, but I was with the president like 2 weeks ago. I go, that's great. I still need your license and registration. I gave her a ticket, and she was pissed off. I never heard it. The funny thing is I never went to traffic court on that. So to answer your question, maybe that was squashed upstairs.
Yeah, no, it seems like a phenomenal lifestyle. Like you said, you're happily where you're currently living. I'm gonna keep that quiet from the airways, but now being on the back end of it, going through your time serving and all that stuff, how fun is it to start writing these stories, or in general, like everything in the books?
Oh, it's great. I get to live vicariously through myself. And I miss a lot of it, I mean, I don't miss the red tape and the bullshit, but I miss the camaraderie. I miss the action. It was a lot of fun. I always wanted to be a cop, and I got to achieve my dream. Writing these books, I get a chuckle out of it. I enjoy doing it. Makes me a little bit of money. And I do. I get to remember my prior life.
Absolutely. And is there what's the intention when you're creating a book? What is the initial goal for everyone for that as a reader?
I try to educate people give them a behind the scenes look at the New York City Police Department, and I'm trying to make them laugh. Because I do have a dark sense of humor, and I am very sarcastic. So, and I've been told, and I know it does, it bleeds into my writing. And, I mean, I spare no one usually in my books, including myself. If I do something stupid or I fuck something up, it's in there. I mean, in my book, NYPD Law and Disorder, I open up with the story about how I'm in a public restroom with my pants down to my ankles, and a kid is hanging over the other stall trying to pull my gun belt off the hook. And I got into a hockey fight with him, and I'm beating the shit out of him, yelling, "Let go of my gun belt, let go of my gun belt." His friends go into the next stall and they're pulling him, and I got a tug of war going with my pants down to my ankle.
Thank God it's not cold that day.
It was the dead of fucking winter.
Awesome, man. Let's end it right here just because we're getting late at the night for everyone here, but where can all my listeners find all your phenomenal books?
Sure. So if you go on Amazon and just go to the book section and type in my name, Vic, V-I-C, Ferrari like the car, my my book library will pop up. I've got 6 books, 4 of which are behind the scenes look at the New York City Police Department. They're all paperback. I try to keep the price point low at $10 and $2.99 ebook download.
Awesome, man. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming on the podcast. We look forward to many coming down the road.
Chad, thank you so much and Merry Christmas.
Absolutely. You Merry Christmas to yourself too, man. Thank you very much.